Hi guys and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my October book wrap-up video. If you watch my September wrap-up video, you'll know that I've left this pretty late. We're now coming into like the middle of November. I basically filmed my September wrap-up video a couple of days ago. I'm filming this now, and then before we know it, I'll be filming my November wrap-up video too. Without further ado, I'm going to go into the books. I'll start with the one non-fiction book that I read, and then I'll do them all in order of my star ratings. So the non-fiction book that I read in October was The Secret Barrister. Now this is a non-fiction book written by an anonymous barrister. I read this because I read This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay, and I thought that that book was really interesting, and this book is kind of similar to that except that it is focusing on the England and Wales criminal justice system. So I personally have a really big interest in like law and crime, so yeah, I knew I had to read this. So I listened to this one on audiobook. It does feel a lot more educational than This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. That one is more funny and it has a lot of like anecdote stories in there about the patients, and it is quite like light-hearted and humorous at times, whereas this one is very educational because he does have to explain a lot of points about the law. The author separates it into different categories, so focusing on like judges and juries and sentencing and all those different things, and he does have to explain quite a lot of like legal terms and things just so that you understand the book. I didn't mind any of that because it is a non-fiction book. At the end of the day, I expect to be learning something about it, and this book is basically talking about how we treat the English criminal justice system as like the holy grail, and it's based on all of these fundamental principles about innocent until proven guilty, and he talks about the importance of keeping up some of these principles that we have, but then in reality there's a lot going on behind closed doors that the public don't really know about. It was definitely very eye-opening. So firstly, it was talking about how barristers, we always think that they make a ton of money, but in the criminal system a lot of the time they don't make a lot of money at all. If they take on legal aid work, then the amount that they get paid is actually kind of dire. It's talking about how they don't have the resources to properly prepare cases, about how the court system is really understaffed, how important evidence can sometimes be overlooked by overworked legal staff, and that one piece of evidence could be really useful in a case, but a lot of the time you kind of get the case a couple of hours before you're going into court, and you just don't have time to properly and adequately defend people. And this was all a really scary read because it was talking about how this can lead to miscarriages of justice, and it really could happen to anyone, because he was saying that if you're ever a victim of crime, if a family member is accused of a crime that they didn't commit, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I don't know, maybe CCTV isn't there to prove that you didn't do something, or it kind of looks like you did, anything like that is totally plausible and possible and could happen. It was just really scary to read that. We basically rely on this system to weed out the good from the bad. There are so many things that could go wrong, just like human error and poor training and all that kind of thing. I do think it's such an important book for a mass audience to read, just so that we're aware of what's actually happening and how it should be changed. So yeah, I really recommend that book, and there is like a part 2 that he's done. I'm assuming it's a he, I don't actually know. The audiobook that I listened to was narrated by a guy, so I'm just assuming that it's a guy. He has written like a part 2, and I will be reading that at some stage. So yeah, really enjoyed that book. Very informative and very like terrifying to think about. The next one is another book that I listened to on audio, and unfortunately I gave this one a 2 out of 5, so I was pretty disappointed by it, and that was 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard. Now this book is set in Ireland, and it's also set during the very early onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're basically following these two characters, Kira and Oliver, who meet right at the start of COVID when people are still very unsure about what's happening. They start dating, then the pandemic hits properly and there's like lockdowns and all that jazz. So Kira and Oliver decide to move in together so that they can still see each other throughout the lockdown. And then 56 days after they meet, a body is found in Oliver's apartment. Yeah, we go from there. One thing I did like about this book was how Catherine Ryan Howard wrote about COVID-19. If you watch my September wrap-up video, you'll know that I read False Witness by Karen Slaughter, which also has like a COVID-19 backdrop to it, and I didn't like how it was used in that book. I don't know, it was written into it in a way that took me out of the story and read as a little bit patronising, preachy, that kind of thing. Whereas in this book, COVID-19 is in its very early days. It's focusing on how people are very confused, kind of apprehensive. It talks about how weird it was to go to the supermarket for the first time when you have to queue, and I think that was really reflective of how COVID was in England especially. A lot of people in England were very confused and scared and unsure of what to do. The new rules were very confusing. I remember going to the supermarkets and having to queue outside and like feeling guilty when you went in to buy something that wasn't like bread, milk, that kind of thing. And that whole experience was kind of in this book, which I did kind of like actually. Something that I really didn't like about this book is that it felt very repetitive. So there are a lot of scenes where Kira and Oliver are chatting to each other, and we're first following it from Kira's perspective, and then we will revisit this scene from Oliver's perspective, and he will basically tell the whole scene again, basically exactly the same, just with a couple of extra bits about what he thought about the situation. And we have to read these conversations in full again, all these little details that one of them mentioned, the other one will mention as well. We're also following these detectives' perspectives, and I wasn't really bothered about them. I found them a bit boring, and even their perspectives were like repetitive as well. Like when they go in and find this body in Oliver's apartment, it just kept mentioning over and over again how badly this body smelled, which is gross, but also, why are you telling me this like 10 times? I swear it was like just being bashed over my head that this body smelled. Like, okay, we get that. All of the repetitiveness made me like a bit distanced from the story. When it got to the end, I didn't really care about the plot reveal and the twist and everything like that. I just thought, oh, okay. I only gave this book a 2 out of 5 because overall I didn't really like it. The only thing I really liked was the COVID stuff, and I feel like a lot of people aren't going to like that because a lot of people don't want to read about COVID when they've literally just been through COVID. So yeah, I'm really disappointed about this one because I also wanted to read The Nothing Man by Catherine Ryan Howard, and now I'm a bit unsure as to whether I want to read that. So if you've read either of these books, let me know if The Nothing Man is better, and I will give it a go. The next book I read was a really quick one. It is basically a very, very short story, and it's called Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. I picked this one up on a bit of a whim because we were in October and I saw people reading this book on Instagram, and with it being a short horror, I wanted to get in the Halloween mood. I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 because I did like it, but it won't stick with me. So this book is mainly told through emails and Insta messages between these two women who meet online, and it very, very quickly develops into this like intense BDSM style relationship where one of them is like the master and one of them is a slave and has to do all the things that the master tells them to do. So the things that the master tells the slave to do end up being more and more gross and creepy, and then it has a very like shocking and gross ending. This book was fine. There's not a lot to say about it though because it is so short. I would recommend people read it just because it is so short. It does have some really disgusting imagery in there. Also, something about this book is that the writing style was really strange. At the very start, these two women speak to each other in like the poshest way ever. They read like two little old ladies, and I think they're meant to be like really young women, so it's kind of weird. I feel like because it's not going to stay with me for very long that I can only really give it a 3. The next 2 books that I read, I'm going to talk about them both at the same time because they're by the same author, they're in the same series, and I gave them the same rating. So I read Truth or Dare and Woman in the Water by Katarina Diamond. So because the 7th one, which is called Trick or Treat, was coming out in the middle of October, I basically read Truth or Dare and Woman in the Water in order to catch up. Truth or Dare was very like dark academia. It was set in a school and it had like cult vibes, which I really enjoyed. And then the 6th book, Woman in the Water, was super, super dark and disturbing. I listened to this one on audiobook, and I was driving home from work one night after like a really late finish at like midnight, and I started listening to this book in the car on the way home, and it just happened to be the most horrible, heart-wrenching, awful scene I've ever had to listen to. And yeah, this book took a really, really dark turn, but I think the way that she wrote about it was really, really amazing. She talked a lot about the emotions behind the trauma that comes with this horrible thing that happened. I just loved these books. I gave them a 4 because I think it's because I now have really high expectations for Katarina Diamond, and I really love these books, but none of them have blown me away like the first one did, I think, or maybe the second one, I can't remember. They're all on like a similar level to me at this point, and I think she'd have to work like super hard in order to blow me away now. As I've said a million times, I would recommend this series if you like police procedural series where you follow in a detective. They are very heavily focused on the investigation, which I love, so if you love that, then give these ones a go. Next up, I read something that has been on my TBR for years, and that was Requiem for a Dream by Hubert Selby Jr. I picked this book up because I read one that I'm going to talk about later, which got a 5-star, and I was in such a buzz about like the themes of that book that I picked this one up as well. So this is one of those classic books, classic films. You might have already seen it. I haven't seen anything about it. All I knew is that this book and the film was about drug addiction. We're basically following this guy called Harry and his best friend Tyrone, his girlfriend Marion, and his mum Sarah. Harry, Marion and Tyrone are all addicted to heroin. They basically have this plan that they're going to buy a pound of uncut heroin and they're going to make a fortune off it. Meanwhile, Harry's mum Sarah is obsessed with the idea of going on a TV show, like a game show, and looking really beautiful, wearing this dress that she wore for Harry's bar mitzvah. However, she realises that she's put a little bit of weight on since she last wore that dress, and she's just basically obsessed with this idea that she wants to wear this dress on this TV show, so she becomes addicted to diet pills. So this is obviously a very, very heavy book. You do follow these characters as their lives get worse and worse, and they are then like consumed by their addictions. This book was also really, really difficult to get into. It's got a really strange writing style where there's no commas, there's no speech marks, there's barely any full stops. It is basically one long stream of consciousness. There's also no chapters and no like natural breaks, so it's very hard to like stop and start this book. I did actually consider DNF in this book at one point because I think I was about 20% through and I just thought, God, this is difficult. However, I'm glad I pushed through because it ended up being a really powerful and really unnerving book that I really ended up enjoying towards the end. And you also feel so sorry for these characters, especially Sarah. She is like the most sweet, naive person, and she ends up getting addicted to these diet pills. She doesn't even know what they are. She gets given them by this doctor and she doesn't realise that there's anything wrong with them. I think her story is probably one of the saddest in this book, but they've all got really sad stories and it is a very, very depressing book. I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 because I really did enjoy this book. It felt very clever, and I imagine if you read this at school or studied it at college or university or something, there would be a lot in this book. There's probably all these reasons why the writing style is the way it is. It's probably to reflect some sort of drug-induced state. I think it was written in like the 80s or something, but you honestly wouldn't know. It does feel very modern still. I really do want to read more from Hubert Selby Jr. So I've added 2 books since I read this book to my TBR. I think one of them's called The Room. One of them is his debut novel. I can't remember the name of it right now. But yeah, I'm really intrigued by his writing. I would recommend this if you want like a challenge, but something that is really engrossing and it's like so bad that you just can't look away, that kind of thing. The next book I have to tell you about is Tender as the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica. So I read this for my Spooktober reading vlog, which should be up by now, and I will link it somewhere in the description or like in the little cards. This book is about a society where animals had this infectious disease that meant that humans could no longer eat their meat or any of their like byproducts. There's been a new law that has legalized cannibalism, but in a controlled fashion. There's these companies that breed and slaughter humans for the purposes of eating them. It's like a dystopian horror kind of story. This book was so gross and thought-provoking because it really made me think about how all the gross things that they were describing were happening to these humans are all things that happen in today's society to animals. It is so disturbing to think about when it's framed in that way of what if this happened to humans, because it's just barbaric. It was very difficult to think about. We're mainly following this guy called Marcos who works in one of these like slaughterhouses or processing plants. He's quite high up in this company and he tries to remain sort of indifferent to what he's doing. He's just doing it for the money. It has a very similar vibe to 1984 where you're following someone who hates the company that they work for. Basically all the values that they hold seem to be different to what their company embodies. And it also felt very much like Brave New World because especially at the start it kind of introduces you to this dystopian world by showing a tour of the processing plant, and that was very similar to what I read in Brave New World, where you follow a tour of like the schools and like the breeding places where they breed these humans. It felt very much like a modern take on a dystopian book, and I really love that. This book was also really shocking. When you get to the end of part 1 you're like, what just happened there? And then the ending as well, I didn't see that coming at all, and I really love that about this book. I loved all the finer details in this book as well. So it talks about this church who try and sacrifice themselves to the processing plants because they want to help people. It's talking about scavengers who are the people that can't afford or just don't want to buy meat at market value, so They are like predators. They wait outside the processing plants. They will attack vans for the meat. Oh, it's just horrifying. So I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5. I think it could be referenced for years to come as like a modern dystopian classic. It definitely felt very similar to ones that I've read before, and I think this is a really thought-provoking and relevant story to today's society because it feels like something that would never happen, but the way that it's framed in this book just makes you think that yeah, it actually could happen, and that is a terrifying thought. The next book that I have to talk about is The Whisper Man by Alex North, and this is another one that I gave 4.5 out of 5. This book was just like the perfect spooky autumnal read. We are following this guy called Tom and his son Jake, and they're moving to this small town called Featherbank. What they don't know is that in Featherbank 20 years ago there was this serial killer who was nicknamed the Whisper Man because he used to hang outside his victims' windows whispering to them in order to lure them out, and his victims were primarily young boys. So this guy, Frank Carter, was caught for his crimes and put in prison, and he's still there. However, in the present day, a little boy has gone missing in this town who said that he could hear whispering at his window. So there's all this speculation about whether Frank Carter had an accomplice back in the day and if he's now coming back in order to like terrify the town again. So this book was really exciting and it read a lot like a film. Like, I think it would be a really, really good film. It also had a lot of paranormal elements to it, which normally is something that I would not like. However, I thought this book dealt with it really well. This book was genuinely scary and creepy, and it has this creepy kid in it that is like one of the scariest versions of the creepy kid trope that I've ever read. Not only was it scary, but it also had a lot of heart and emotion in it. It focuses a lot on the dysfunctional father-son relationships in this book, and I really liked being able to read from both sides, like both the fathers and the sons in this book, in order to properly understand everyone's point of view. It did take me a little while to get into this book to start with. I don't really know why. But then the last half of it I read in one sitting because I was just so engrossed in it and it was really engaging. I thought the plotting in this book was really clever because all the clues are there for you to work out. Obviously I'm not one to work things out, so I didn't. I thought this was a really, really good spooky mystery book, and I will definitely be looking for more books by Alex North because this one was so good. Next up is a book that I gave 4.75 stars to. Again, I read this one for my Spooktober reading vlog, which will be linked above and below. This book was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. Now, this book was so good. I gave it 4.75 out of 5, which is very picky, I know, but I am very, very stingy with my 5 stars. So this book, we're mainly following this girl called Jessica Miller, who in the present day is super confident, successful. She's really like self-assured and kind of full of herself, to be honest. She gets this invite to go to a university reunion because it's 10 years since they've graduated, and she's really excited for this because she wants to go and show everyone how amazing she is, basically. So when she was at uni 10 years ago, she was part of this group called the East House 7. So the East House 7 were this group who were really close and really tight-knit, and they were basically friends for the whole time they were in university. However, in their senior year, one of the girls from the East House 7 was found murdered in her room, and she'd basically been stabbed loads of times with a pair of scissors. These scissors were then found under her boyfriend's pillow. Everyone sort of put 2 and 2 together and thought that he must have killed her. However, there wasn't enough evidence to formally charge him with anything, and the case still remains technically unsolved. So this girl who was murdered, her brother still works at the university, and he's planning for everyone to be reunited at this 10-year anniversary, and he's finally going to find out what happened to his sister because he's going to put lots of pressure on them to spill all their secrets and finally find out what happened to his sister. I really enjoyed my time reading this book. I loved the dark academia, university campus vibes. It really made me wish that I was back at uni, and I just loved that whole vibe. I also adored the way that this book was told because we are mainly following Jessica in the present day, but whenever a secret is revealed, we will flash back to the time when they were all at university, and we will follow the character who the secret is about. So you do get to see a lot into these characters' perspectives, a lot of the reasons why they do what they do, the emotions that they were feeling at the time, which I thought was so good because all these characters were just so well developed and you could totally understand why they were all the way that they were. It also meant the pacing was really good because you were constantly finding things out, constantly flicking back and forth. I thought the writing was super good because It delved really deep into friendship, ambition, success, and it just felt like it had so much more depth than a lot of other mystery fiction books. The only thing that stopped this from being a 5-star read was you couldn't really tell the difference between them in their teens and in their 30s. Maybe that's the point, but it did stand out to me a little bit. I also wasn't a huge fan of the romance in this book. I'm not really a romance fan anyway, so that might be why, but there is quite a lot of romance in this book, which made it feel a little bit young adult and a little bit like immature. It was just something that I personally didn't really like, because the romance does include like infidelity, and that sort of thing is not really what I like to read about. But they were very minor issues, and overall this book was super well crafted, really well written. It was deeply layered, and it had a really fast moving plot while still showing a lot of attention to the characters. So overall it was just a really well balanced book. I'm really excited to see what Ashley Winstead brings out next, because I will definitely be reading it. And last on my list to tell you about is the book that I mentioned when I talked about Requiem for a Dream. So this book is Crank by Ellen Hopkins, and I gave this book a 5 out of 5. So this book is a semi-autobiographical free verse poem. The author in real life has this daughter who was addicted to crystal meth, and this story basically is from the perspective of this daughter, like a fictionalized version, as she struggles with her addiction with crystal meth. This book was so beautifully written. I think it's because of the free verse poem format, because it just seems like every word is very specifically chosen and specifically placed. It just all flowed so beautifully. It was so hard to stop reading this book because it just, as I said, it just went on and flowed so nicely. It was so hard to put it down, and I just wanted to pick it up straight away as soon as I put it down. You just feel so emotional for this character. She's called Christina, but whenever she has drugs, she has this like alter ego called Brie, who can do anything and can be anything. As you would imagine, this book is pretty heavy, like Requiem for a Dream, because we are following drug addiction, which comes with Christina putting herself in a lot of dangerous situations. Sometimes you just want to shake her, but that's the nature of being addicted to drugs. I also thought it was so strange to realise that crystal meth was like a party drug in America. In England, that is not something that people take over here, or at least not that I know of anyway. So I didn't realise it was so prevalent and so easy to get. Like crystal meth over here is something that's really extreme and rare, I think. I just thought that was really interesting. I also thought it was really interesting to see from Christina's perspective, and you do kind of understand why she's doing what she's doing, but it's just so sad to read about the spiral that she's going on. I would describe it as like hauntingly beautiful. The writing was amazing and it was really moving and captivating, but it was still talking about some really dark things. I couldn't fault this book at all. As soon as I finished reading it, I wanted to instantly read the next 2 books. However, I couldn't find them at my library or like immediately, so I read Requiem for a Dream instead. I will be reading those next 2 books very soon, and I've also added another book by Ellen Hopkins to my TBR because it seems like she's got quite a few that are told in a similar style. There's one called Burned, which is about religion, so I will definitely read that as well. That is all the books I have to talk about today. That was a whopping 10 books. I can't believe I read 10 books in 1 month. I don't remember ever doing that before. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you've read any of these books before and what you thought about them, or if you want to now read any of these books now that you've heard me talking about them. If you could like this video, if you liked it, that would be amazing, and if you could subscribe, that would mean the world to me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye!